Good evening, everyone. We're going to start the policy meeting. It is Wednesday, March 2nd, and we will start announcements. Dr. Yanni?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay, next up, we are going to approve the minutes, hopefully, from last month. Committee, are we okay with that? Jenna? Okay. All right, we will move that forward to the legislative. And policy recommendations. Let's start with second readings. Threat assessment.
So policy 236.1 threat assessment, we took a look at this last month. One of the things that we noted that the policy was very, very long, very, very dense. And I spent some time with our solicitor looking at the policy. And what you'll notice in your packet is that the majority of the policy, the language actually moved to an AR. So it's made the policy a lot shorter. I want to just walk through a couple of the changes that we've made. We actually defined threat in the definition section because throughout the entire policy, it was written out in long form. So a threat is the safety of, a threat is something that could harm the safety of students, the student, other students, school employees, school facilities, the community, and others. So we actually defined threat so that we didn't have to have that language repeated throughout. In the delegation of responsibilities, one of the things that we want to be sensitive about is when we're dealing with a student and we're dealing with a situation that could involve a threat, we don't want to unknowingly create more trauma than has already been felt. So in the guidelines section, I would like to add one more statement, and it reads, the threat assessment team shall consider the facts of each situation objectively and respond accordingly so as not to overreact or create trauma for the student. That guideline will really serve as a reminder when we're doing the threat assessment work for principals and school leaders and district office leaders to really take a look at each individual scenario and not automatically blanket responses because every situation is so different.
So, does anybody have any comments?
I like that addition. You're thinking it would go right after the existing paragraph, the threat assessment team shall? Is that where it would go? For the annual?
Where are you, Mr. Soretta?
Under guidelines. So your new paragraph that you'd like to add, where would you put it?
So I would probably put it after the threat assessment team shall include individuals with expertise in school health.
That was my thought as well. The only other comment I have, so I do like that addition. It's related to the one other comment I have. There's language that we're moving to the AR that I wonder if my fellow board members feel we want to stipulate as a statement of the board rather than move to the AR specifically. And Steve, maybe this comes out of code. I'm not sure, but under what was the inquiry and assessment section, there's a whole list of discrimination, Title IX, bullying, suicide awareness, hazing, dating violence. If those sorts of statements want to be in policy because they're a stipulation by us and not something we want to allow to due process. I'm really asking my fellow policy committee members whether that's important or not.
Mark, your comment there, I mean, where that's identified, isn't that just though in the context of what the threat assessment team is going to be? Meaning we have separate policies, I think, to address all those. I know we have hazing, bullying, dating violence, discrimination, so I'm not sure we need to restate
Yeah,
those
it's
things
really
as a
a-
policy.
You're right. I mean, it's a list that says must be consistent with regulations and laws and board policy covering these topics. So they're implied already because you have to meet all those things anyway. It's just to strengthen the importance of, I'm fine if everyone doesn't think so, but it's just to sort of strengthen the importance of those particular, the range of things we're talking about here and the other policies that may apply.
I think if we did that, we might want to reword it a little bit, because I'm not sure that just reinserting that paragraph necessarily accomplishes that. But, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not arguing against you. I'm just trying to, I guess one of my questions for Dr. Yanni is, I know the solicitor recommended we move a lot of this, and if there was a particular reason why, a legal reason why that should be an AR, I think we'd want to double check that. I'm not opposed to moving it back in, but I just don't want to create a situation where we have like dueling policies in a sense that might confuse matters. But I agree with you. It's important enough that if restating it is a good goal, then so be it.
So we're bound, Ms. Kitten, I need your help here, just, so anything related to Title IX, we're bound to investigate. Can you speak to that a little bit?
No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, anything that rises to that level, we have to have that conversation to decide if it does rise to the level, if it is, and then we have to move forward. I mean, that is the law. Absolutely.
So it sounds like, okay, that's fine. So let's leave it the way it is then. The other related piece to that is at the very bottom of the part we're carrying out, we're carving out, there's a section that's titled Annual Board Report, or, it's in the crossed out section very near the bottom. Do we still want an annual board report? And if so, I don't know that we need to be as specific as is indicated here in policy, but do we want to stipulate that we would like to continue annual board report?
So if you look under guidelines, where it says the district shall, I need to insert the word comply. The district shall comply with all safe schools reporting. Part of safe schools reporting requires me to give you an update in executive session prior to July 1st every year.
Okay, then it's already covered.
Anna?
So along the lines of what Mark was saying, I had another section that I was sort of wondering whether we wanted to pull back up into the policy, which is, for me, at least the version I'm top of page 6, where it talks about the threat assessment team shall maintain confidentiality and handle all student records in accordance with applicable law. Again, I could take it or leave it, but I kind of toss it up for consideration of whether we want to have that, kind of confidentiality expectation specifically in the policy.
I think we certainly can. In the guidelines section, we can reiterate confidentiality there. I don't think that hurts to do that.
Yeah, I think where it talks about the threat assessment team shall include individuals with expertise in. But that's a good place to add a reminder of, it's not just expertise, but they have to also be, employees and confidentiality and all the other.
Dr. Yanni, as we finalize it, double check the first 3 definitions, behavioral service providers, bias, and individualized management plan. I'm not sure those terms are used in the policy anymore, and it might streamline it. You might be able to put that in the AR potentially, which might then create the definitions being just threat and threat assessment, which give it a little more impact as well.
That was the last point I was going to make. What I didn't want to do was remove that there if we were going to put anything back in. So we can absolutely, when Ms. Evans goes through, we'll move those as well.
Okay. Teacher, you want to go first?
Okay, just a practical question in terms of executing this, the annual information of the whole process, how does that happen? I mean, is that just posting it on the website, or is it what is the actual process?
So it's twofold. So in executive session in June, I always give you an update on Act 44. And then we have to, by July 1st, or actually by July 31st of every year, do a Safe Schools report, and we put that out on the website as well. And it also involves our memorandum of understanding that we have with the local police department.
So that is the students, parents, guardians, and staff who shall be informed. That's
The piece about this, we'll have something in handbooks moving forward.
yep, makes sense.
Okay, back to your original edition. So can you read it again? I just, the last
Sure.
word, I think it should be students, but I want to hear it again.
The threat assessment team shall consider the facts of each situation objectively and respond accordingly so as not to overreact or create trauma for the student.
And I think that should say, I like that statement. I think it should be students, because when they're taking into consideration what actions they're going to take, like say they say they're going to close school, they need to consider how that affects everybody, not just the students that are directly involved.
Got it. By the way, I did look at our peer districts, as I usually do when we're looking at policy, and Lower Merion and several other of our peer districts, they have the bulk of what we moved into the AR and their AR as well.
So regarding the student versus students thing, I mean, that,
I knew you could let that.
I can't, you're right. The policy in general, especially as it was before, with the language being moved to AR, was really written, the sort of structure of it was about a threat by a student. And a lot of, when it talked about student, was talking about the student who was making the threat. Or who was creating the threat, or whatever the correct verb is. So I think your new language really fits in with that model, but what's left without all the stuff that's being moved to the AR is sort of much broader. There are still a few places where it talks specifically about the new language that defines threat primarily talks about compromising the safety of the student is the first thing it says, meaning the student who was verbing the threat, whatever verb we're using here. So I suspect that the reason that that's the case is because threat assessment as it's defined through the law, et cetera, is really about the student. And if that's the case, and the main purpose of this policy is because there's school code that requires us to have it, I'm not sure we should really broaden it. Or maybe we should say the student and other students, or as it does in the definition.
Do, but I'm not sure what. I could go either way. I hear Mark's point 100%.
Can I jump in
If
here?
we change, yeah, I mean, if we change it to other students, but there's also other people referenced, school employees, facilities, community, and others, that would we have to say to take like sort of everything into account? That I think it's either got to be student singular for the reason Mark said, or that whole laundry list. I don't think we can just really say other students, because even in the purpose point where we're saying protect the health, safety, and welfare of its students and the community and so forth and so on, yes, that's broader, but I agree with Mark that the policy is kind of directed at the verbing student, for lack of a better phrase, as Mark said it.
Aren't we telling you to create an assessment team? We're telling the team what to do. That's why I think we're telling them like, all the students into consideration before.
I think using the same sort of list that shows in the threat definition, the student, other students, school employees, school facilities, community, and/or others, it probably covers all of this and would make all of us at least moderately happy.
Is that what you were going to say?
It is what I was going to say.
Sorry, Jenna, you gotta just speak faster, 'cause then I don't.
Prior to Mr. Wallach saying anything, I put that in my notes, so.
Never mind.
Policy 827.
So 827 is our implementing equitable practices policy. At the last meeting, we had some conversation around the purpose statement and if all of that purpose statement was needed. So I want to have that conversation. I also want to bring to the attention of the committee, we made sure that the definitions that are talked about in the policy are in the definitions section. There are several of them. Everything else, or I shouldn't say everything else, there were no other substantive changes since last month. But I do think I want to have a conversation about the purpose statement, which, as the committee knows, is my favorite part of every policy. Right? Right, Mr. Sirota?
I'll answer the question where, you know, you have in brackets, remove this language, question mark? Yes.
I also want to point out, Mrs. Ionity and I were having a conversation earlier today, and if you take a look, we really want this policy to focus on students and student groups. So we want to make sure that that's explicit in the policy. If you look at the total or the policy as comprehensively as you can, what this does is this really memorializes practices that need to happen every year or every other year. And the reason that I'm thankful that we have a policy like this is because as we continue to talk about our equity and empowerment work, we want to be very clear that we're looking for equitable practices across the board. So I just want to go back and say that this policy isn't about taking something away from one group of students because another group of students might not have it. It's about making sure that every group of students has the ability to be successful in and outside of the classroom.
I'll second the yes on the purpose statement. And then I want to just throw out something about the first paragraph under delegation of responsibility, Dr. Yanni. I know we talked about this a little bit last time. The first part of that, as originally written, was about the least achievement in a group or a student, and then there's the students that are not making a year's worth of growth, and it looks like we separated that into two sentences. My concern, though, is that I'm not sure the first part, maybe this is intentional or not, this is going to get to my question. I'm not sure the first part has an action item anymore, meaning the second part where it says the year's worth of growth then continues on, determine why and target resources and efforts to address needs and improve outcomes. And I'm wondering, unless that is solely for the year's worth of group category, it leaves the least achievement category out of it. So should we take that last part out and create a third sentence that says for both the above or something more eloquent than that, we determine why, target resources, et cetera? I mean, unless that was purposeful, I'm not sure.
No, I think sometimes when I'm sitting on my couch working on policy, things make a lot of sense, and then when we're actually here talking about it, we flesh out the ideas a little bit differently.
100%.
So, yeah, so I'm comfortable doing that because I think we want, when it comes to achievement, we want to look at why do we have a group that is disparate, and then what groups of kids aren't moving a year's worth of growth in a year's time. And often when we talk about equity work, we think about historically underrepresented groups, but many times when we're looking at kids that haven't made a year's worth of growth, we're talking about our top learners, our gifted support learners that aren't making a year's worth of growth in a year's time. So I think that it's important to have that third sentence.
To that point, last month, I believe we talked about that it wasn't just use it. So right now it says use an equity lens and quantitative and qualitative data to assess which are experiencing the least achievement. And I think what we really mean is use an equity lens and quantitative data in general for all purposes. Like, it's not just about.
Correct, it's not just, right.
So,
Right.
you know, I mean, I don't mind calling out the groups experiencing, students and or groups experiencing the least achievement, but it can't be exclusively about the groups achieving the least achievement. So, yeah, reworking that paragraph, and I don't think it's a substantive change, but I think we need to just clarify that's for all, use that for everything.
I agree that I don't think either of these are a substantive change. And I mean, it might be as simple as just using the intro phrase of the first sentence in the second sentence or something similar to that, so.
Fair enough.
I have another, are still on that topic? Yeah, okay.
So can we just backtrack real quick to the purpose statement? So I agree, I think some of this needs to come out. I would propose, though, keeping in the sentence that says the treatment of students shall be based upon, each student's needs or the needs of students who are part of the same subgroup, and then maybe starting with the sentence that says the pursuit of educational equity, that's where we cut. You guys be okay with that?
I'm actually a little uncomfortable with that particular sentence. So I was kind of happy that it looked like we were striking it without having to have to parse it. My problem with it is that, and I understand the point, but I think it can be read as, saying that, if this student is part of this group, they're like all the other members of that group. And I know that's not what we mean, but I'm uncomfortable with sort of putting that together.
What
As
about if-
students, the student or students who are part of the same subgroup sort of implies that, I'm just like other students who are in my subgroup, and
Yep.
I'm not happy with that.
No, I think that's actually a fair point. What about if we just left in the treatment of students shall be based upon each student's needs, and leave out then, the part about or the needs of students who are part of the same subgroup?
Right, that was my first thought, but then the whole subgroup thing is also important. I mean, the analysis is done in part on subgroups. And so I know this is only the purpose, and so it's not, really the structure of the policy, but if you're talking about the student, I feel like you also somehow have to talk about subgroups.
Right. I mean, that's part of the equity work, is like identifying like why is this particular group of students not.
Right. So I feel like if you leave in one, you kind of have to have them both, but maybe they just don't have to be in the same sentence. Or at
That's
least
not
tied
right,
together
Steve.
quite so tightly. It's that implication that one
I don't know
student
that
is just
that's,
like another.
I don't know that that's a substantive change either. Why don't, tomorrow I rework that and I can share it out with the committee? Fair enough.
I have one other non-substantive change. Under guidelines, the second group of bullets, bullet number 3, all staff shall encourage students to participate in school activities and interscholastic athletics. Some of those activities are also interscholastic. Can we just drop interscholastic? Participate in school activities and athletics?
Sure.
Are athletics not just activity as well? Can we just put?
Well, we commonly
Activities.
use activities and athletics as group of extracurriculars or co-curriculars. Those two terms, I'm comfortable giving both those terms. I feel like if you don't use the word athletics, then compared to the way we phrase other policies, it might look like we're leaving them out.
Was your change or your suggestion to drop the word interscholastic?
Yeah.
To just say participate in school activities and athletics?
I think that's the simple way, and it that's fine. Encourage student, it doesn't have to be interscholastic to be the thing we're trying to achieve here.
Unless we want to add another definition for teacher. Define activities. Okay, any more on this? Okay. Move on to first readings.
So the first reading we have is 232, student involvement in decision-making. This is a very brief policy. This is really a sort of umbrella policy. We've talked about umbrella policies before that sort of make very broad statements. So if you look in the purpose statement, the board believes that students should be permitted to participate in the governance of school activities at levels appropriate to their ages and competencies. I kept the substance of the policy, but what you'll see is just some grammatical and syntax changes. So the board encourages students to participate in activities appropriate to their maturity and competency, leading to administrative decision-making about all facets of the educational experience. So we have serving as student representatives to the school board, participation in student government activities, participation in student surveys, being involved in planning assembly programs and school-wide sponsored forums of interest, and engaging in public participation at committee and legislative meetings. And then the delegation of responsibility is really, to me, or my designee, to establish formal and informal forums to solicit student input.
Mark?
At least a couple of the principals have done that, have lunchtime groups where they meet with a group of students to hear what's on their minds. Do you want to call those out, or is it in the list, or would you rather just let those be as they happen in case they don't continue to happen?
I think I'd rather them be organic and not necessarily call them out, because then I think we could either get too exhaustive of a list or then miss something in the list, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I had one question about we have a phrase in the purpose that talks about appropriate to their ages and competencies, and then down in authority, it speaks to their maturity and competency. I'd probably lean more toward maturity, but I feel like they should, be consistent. My other question was, I don't know, maybe more procedural. There's no guidelines here. That's unusual, right? And I'm looking at Mark.
That is unusual. This is a briefer than usual policy. My immediate thought is that what's listed under authority is more like guidelines. I think authority is supposed to mean in policy language, from where does the school board derive the authority to make this policy? PSBA doesn't agree with me that's what it means. And it's not just me who says that. Like, I've been on various other policy-making organizations in the past, and that has always been what it has meant in all the organizations I've ever been a part of. But that's not what it seems to mean in many of our policies. So it's not exactly wrong to call it authority based on what other things show up in authority in our policies. So I've stopped complaining about things that are in the authority section that I think don't belong there, because it's like happens in every policy.
And Jenna has started complaining.
Yeah, well, and that's why I appreciate that you're here, Jenna.
Don't worry, we still have purpose statements.
Okay, do we
I'm
come to some consensus?
I'm comfortable moving some of what's in authority to guidelines so that we stay in format. This is just first read, so I can bring it back next month.
As long as it's in the text, I really don't care about the heading.
the permission issue, what, I'm struggling with the word permitted. What's the point of that? I mean, are you saying they should have a voice, they should have an opportunity, or do they actually have permission to, as like parental permission, or I'm not getting it. But maybe this is my second language issue.
I think it's in the first statement, the board believes that students should be permitted to. I went back and forth. At one point, I had opportunity in there. I had a couple things. I think permitted in the broadest sense of the word.
Yeah, I read that as like the superintendent can't turn them away from doing these
Did you
things.
consider adding encouraged and permitted, or just encouraged? I mean, just permitted sounds like you're doing, oh, okay, we got to do it, we got to give them permission to do it, but, I mean, do we want to encourage it?
So before I put that in there, it said the board believes that students should participate in the governance of school activities. So
Permitted and encouraged.
does anyone have another word they'd like to put in? Just while
Yeah, well,
I do love a good Oxford comma, so.
well, I don't want to make a list of things here. I think the way it was phrased before, students should participate. I think it's great if students want to participate, they should definitely be able to participate. I don't know that I would say that all, it doesn't say all, but I don't think that necessarily it's the right thing for all students. I mean, it's great for us if all students participate. It's not necessarily the right thing for the student if that's not their thing. So I don't think the existing language is exactly what we mean, but I agree that permitted sounds a little sort of, yeah, Andy,
Good.
help me out here.
What if we said that the board welcomes students' participation in the governance of school? The end.
The other possibility is the word you just used, Mark. Students should be able to participate, meaning it creates a
I like
vehicle.
Mr. Kessler, would you read that one more, would you say that one more time?
Because I didn't write it down, but I would just say the board welcomes student participation in the governance of school activities.
No, I don't like that one. Just to be, I know, I like what Jeff said better. Because I think what we're trying to say is that the administration needs to allow them to do it.
If
And
we're
when you say
saying it that-
welcomes, it's like, but when the way Jeff said it,
If we're saying it that
able.
strongly, then it belongs not in purpose. It belongs in guidelines. I think in purpose, I think Andy's language is great purpose language.
it's very pretty language, Andy, no offense.
If we want to say, if we want to
Right, so why don't we,
Batteries.
why don't we take the language that Mr. Kessler suggested for purpose, then in the guidelines, we can spell out a couple things so that whether it's me or another superintendent, or whether it's the current principals or future principals, that it's memorialized in policy. Does that make sense?
Yes. seems to be
I would just like to note that Mark's microphone gave up.
working. Is it working? Oh, it is working. Only when Mark is using it. Okay. So we're moving on from that one. And then our last one here today, policy
235, students' rights and responsibilities. I do want to call out a couple of things. Delegation of responsibility. I want to read what's here, and then I want to add a statement as well. The superintendent and/or designee shall direct principals to distribute a list of students' rights and responsibilities to students and parents, guardians, at least annually. We will most likely take care of that in our student handbooks and in back-to-school night. I would also like to add, the superintendent or designee shall ensure the implementation of the student code of conduct for disciplinary matters. At the end of the policy, it says that violations of this policy may result in disciplinary action consistent with the applicable code of conduct. So I think if we don't have that delegation of responsibility, we're missing, that's a missing feature of the policy.
I think what you're saying is that you can't distribute one without the other, right? So I would suggest that that language should not just say that it should be distributed, but they should be distributed together.
That's actually not what I'm saying, sorry. I said, yeah, you asked a question, I said yes. So we want so the student code of conduct is already in handbooks, it's already available. We're proposing giving the list of rights and responsibilities. But when you take a look at what the rights and responsibilities are at the end of the policy, it says that, you know, violations of the policy may result in disciplinary action, and it references the code of conduct. What I'm suggesting is another statement in delegation of responsibility, delegating the responsibility to me via the principals to make sure that the code of conduct is followed.
So the code of conduct is followed, or the code of conduct is distributed to students and parents and guardians?
Both.
So I still think I think what you're saying is that this statement under delegation of responsibility should say to distribute the students' rights and responsibilities alongside the code of conduct, parents and guardians, at least annually. And that could be through the handbook. I mean, I think that's an appropriate place to put it, but I just think they need to be together so that, you know, you don't get one and then have to go find the other.
So no, I'm sorry. A line that I crossed out at the end of the policy, I think can be moved earlier in the policy. It says a listing of student rights and responsibilities shall be included with the student code of conduct and distributed to students and parents, guardians. As I said before, it makes sense when I'm on my couch working on policy, and then when we flesh it out at these meetings, it's a little bit different. Is that what you were going to say?
No. Not this time. So one of my questions was, we have this list, you know, each student shall, and, you know, we have 11 items here. Maybe I'm coming back to, Mark, I think this might have been part of what you were getting at earlier. Is this policy really about, I mean, because it's called Copy of Student Rights and Responsibilities. So is it really more about how we make students and families aware of what these responsibilities are? Because this gets into more substance of here's what they are. And something about that just seemed out of place to me, to have a list of what their responsibilities are, if the purpose of the policy is really just more about making sure folks have access to what the responsibilities are. I don't know if that makes sense.
So we actually have other policies that cover things like dress code, operations of safe schools, use of public facilities. So I think these 11 things here are pretty comprehensive in nature. So I think I'm comfortable with the list, but if I'm understanding your question correctly, are you saying this just is about notifying families of what and students of what they are? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm trying to get at what really is, and of course we can go to the purpose statement, but what really is the purpose of this policy? Is it to actually provide substance around what we think student rights and responsibilities are? Or when I look at the title, which is called Copy of Student Rights and Responsibilities, it feels like it's more about how do we distribute it and make.
Sorry, the copy piece, when we're all draft policies, just say copy.
That makes sense.
But to your point, I mean, I think there's, even with that misunderstanding, there's still a point here, which is there's two things we're trying to do. We're trying to establish what they are and ensure that the students know about them. And we could put that into purpose if that helps clarify that point.
Okay, so, right, that's what I'll do. So we want to say what they are and how we inform kids and families of them. Yeah. So it's a dual purpose.
And I have an additional comment. I always get a little bit, I don't know, confused when we are telling students or teachers directly, telling, like, the administration to do these things. Doesn't really,
That's right, we're informing the administration, we're asking the administration, we're insisting that the administration ensure that students are, that these are the rights and responsibilities of the students, and that the students and families know about them. So if that's not clear in here, let's make sure it is. Let's fix it, because it's first reading, now's the time to do it.
I mean, we can certainly tweak it, but I think that's what this says, because in the delegation of responsibility, it says the superintendent and/or designee shall direct the principals to provide the information, and then under guidelines, it sets forth the guidelines that should be in the information, right? And we can make it clearer, obviously, but I think it's there.
That was why I added the delegation of responsibility that wasn't there before.
Right.
I added that statement and then the subsequent statement.
Right, you're basically moving the last thing that got crossed out, you're now moving that into delegation of responsibility effectively, right?
Right, because Mrs. Ioannidis is, I think, absolutely correct, because it's, the board's not telling kids, the board's telling the administration to tell kids.
yeah, and that sentence, I guess it comes after, it already sounds like we're telling the students what to do. So it might just need to be. Any other comments from the committee or the board? Oh, Andy.
It's no Oxford comma, but under purpose, this policy should be sets forth, not set. Third word in. And then under delegation of responsibility, it says rights and responsibility, but it should be rights and responsibilities.
Sometimes I do that just to make sure people read carefully.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. So I think that brings us up to public participation. If you would like to speak, come up to the mic. You have 4 minutes. You're being recorded. Say your name and where you live, please.
Jenny Vitella, Ambler. On the 236.1, page 2, the sentence says, "The district shall with all safe schools reporting," and I feel like there's a word missing, or if there isn't.
Comply.
Okay, thank you. I must have missed that. Sorry, didn't read right. And then policy 827, I wonder why we don't have religion in the list of different groups. We actually have an equity empowerment group about religion, and usually I feel like that's a subgroup that should be part of this list. And also the list, I'm thinking, should be alphabetized, so it doesn't appear biased for one group to another, that it should be organized in order, listing alphabetically. Gender expression would start, the first one would be, I guess, ethnicity in this one, and then disability, and then put them in alphabetical order and add religion. Now, I know we have a religious policy, but that's more about practicing religion. It's not really about the equity part of it. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, would anyone else like to come and speak? Okay,
I just have a question about that point about religion. I know this policy, went through several drafts and a lot of ayes. Was it deliberately not included there? Do we know? Do we need to ask those who helped draft it?
I don't know that it was consciously not there So, I mean, we can certainly add it.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee, the board, Dr. Yanni?
Just that we have completed our comprehensive equity audit, so at the April Education Committee meeting, we'll present the results of that and the action plan that we have to focus on the areas that we need to improve.
All right. So with that, the next policy committee meeting is Wednesday, April 6th at 7 PM, hopefully in this room. And when I say 7 PM, I mean following the education committee. And we're adjourned.